What is the scariest thing you have witnessed with your own eyes? This happened around 15 years ago. I was visiting El Salvador with my family and a long-time friend of 30-plus years. One day we went to a coastline and thought it was a great place to fish. We could see 4 miles away, and my friend was a well-experienced diver plus boater. I was feeling really tired that day, so I head off to sleep. I wake up and realize I dozed off too long as it's around 6 p.m. and it's dark. I look around the house that we rented for the week and realize I'm the only one here. My family or friend isn't here, so I wait for 1 more hour and feel a sense of dread come over me almost immediately and ran out to where I last saw them. As I run down the street, I realize a large group of people are gathering at the coast and find out my kids are stranded near the coastline, with people throwing things to them to latch onto. My wife is crying and yelling, and I help some other guys pull them to safety. Then I realize that my friend and the boat are gone. I do one last look at the coastline and hear, "I'm sorry, I did my best. I'm sorry," and I see my friend go down the ocean with the boat flipping over him and drowning him. He swam for 3 hours in rough water with my kids, bringing them as close to the coast as he could before succumbing to exhaustion. Still think he didn't do good enough. Back in the mid-70s, I worked for a company called Triform Corp in Gurnee, Illinois. I worked in the machine shop on the day shift. I usually went in early so I could have a smoke and a cup of coffee before I started my shift. I worked on a turret lathe. Mostly there was a woman who ran the turret lathe on the third shift, so I always took over from her. I didn't know her all that well. I just knew that she was pretty and had long silky hair. One morning I heard a scream and then people scrambling, lots of shouting. I ran over to the source of the noise. There was the girl. Her long hair had gotten tangled in the piece of bar stock she had been working with. It grabbed her hair and ripped her scalp off, peeling it from the back of her head, the tip of her nose. When I got there, it was still spinning around. I'll never forget the wet slapping sound it made. I hit the emergency stop. Somebody had grabbed towels and stuff and wrapped her head and was trying to keep her calm, but she was hysterical. It was bad, really bad. My dad owned a business that dealt with the oil field industry. His company carted the sand to framing sites on occasion. He would contract from a guy who also did this if he didn't have enough trucks to meet the sand demands. The guys he usually hired. This was about 6 months before fields became a mandate from the contracted company, were usually pretty shady. I was headed out to End, Oklahoma to help coordinate this particular effort when I got a call from my dad that one of these guys called him and said he had got in an accident. I was about 10 to 15 miles from where he said he was, so I told my dad I could get there and take some pictures of the insurance liability stuff. If you are not familiar with these roads on the west side of Oklahoma are generally very empty at night. I pull up. This guy is standing behind his truck talking 90 miles per hour on his phone. I can clearly see he is hopped up on what ended up being a meth. I get to the front of the truck to see he had run a 4-way and hit a van. There were 6 people in the van, all but the baby in the car seat was deceased. He hadn't even called the cops. He was talking to him of I called 911 when I got the baby out of the vehicle, checked the rest of the family for pulses, which there were none, and waited for the police. I will never forget how quiet it was, and I will never forget how completely unreal it felt to be checking the pulse of 3 children and completely unsure of what to do with the baby who wasn't crying. Just looking around. The driver ended up going to prison, and I ended up never going out for my dad's company again. Currently, I think my brain has pretty much made the whole experience something. I watched a movie. I don't think about it much, but it was definitely the horrifying thing I have ever seen. I'm a phlebotomist and at the time worked in a hospital. Morning rounds start at 3 a.m. I start in med-surg. Everyone on that floor is either having or has had surgery the second draw of the shift. I knock on the door and start my spiel. Morning, my name is just saying I'm from the lab. I need to draw some. The patient is standing on the bed with their fully inflated Foley catheters in one hand and PICC line in the other, and is covered in blood from head to toe, Carrie style. The room looks like a scene from a horror movie. There was blood on the ceiling, the walls, the mirror, their curtains, the window. It was even on the bathroom floor. That nonsense is above my pay grade, so I alerted the appropriate people and they handled. It turns out he had an allergic reaction to something from his surgery and was hallucinating. Oh, I remember the other one. There was the frequent flyer in our hospital who was a double amputee, legs removed at the hips, no biggie except for the fact that they like to go get their own snacks and such but refuse to use a wheelchair. So I and my co-worker are partnered up walking down the hall to the units, and this person scurries across the hall on the floor in a hospital, down with a bag of chips in their mouth, stops, makes eye contact us, and keep going. This was our first experience with this particular patient. We both just stood there for a second until we heard one of the nurses laughing at us. It was a short fight, but a good one. Nonetheless, I was walking home at night from work. I saw a man dragging a barely clothed young woman across the sidewalk. She was crying and visibly terrified. I called the police and the whole cavalry came. More than a dozen cop cars came and surrounded the area. They got the man. About a year later, I called the officer who took my statement. I wanted to know if the victim was okay. It broke my heart when I was told it was her partner and she didn't press charges and went back to him. I think about her sometimes. I hope wherever she is, she's okay now that she found the strength to leave. I work in the legal system. Now I see a lot of domestic crimes. So many. We have one courtroom devoted to it. Is probably the busiest courthouse in my nation, and as many as I see. I know a lot of cases are like hers. They go unreported, but some never even are seen. I hope when dozens of people can run to save her, she realized people care and want to help her. I hope she remembered that and left that monster. This was in October 2019. The story takes a little setup, so bear with me. I work as a volunteer corner marshal with SICA San Francisco region and have since 2005. This particular the weekend I was at a corner with the president of the SICA, who was primarily there to observe. From my corner post, I could see where the emergency crew was staged. During what was to be the second to last race before lunch, a car pulled off course where emergency was staged with mechanical trouble, which is a good place to be if your car breaks down because they don't have to come get you anyway. It's the last lap, and one of the guys from emergency, who also happens to be a friend of mine, is on the right side of the car talking to the driver, presumably giving him instructions for when they tow him. And about this time I see a car sliding through the grass at a pretty good clip towards the emergency station. I keyed up on my headset and barked heads up emergency, and at that moment the sliding race car hit the disabled car broadside, pinning the emergency crew member between them. For the record, the only member of the crew who heard that was their dispatcher. The rest were communicating with him via radio. I immediately began reporting the incident to race control. As soon as the dust had cleared, other members of the emergency crew along with paramedics were swarmed around the guy who got hit at first. I thought it was someone else until I noticed the guy lying on the ground was wearing red suspenders. Then I knew who it was and my heart sank. This was the third major trauma he'd suffered while working a race. As it ended up, we broke for lunch early. I was really shaken up from the incident and had me a good cry during the lunch break. I did have the presence of mind to pick up some lunch even if I wasn't hungry at the time. It was probably a year and a half when I finally stopped having flashbacks of the incident. As for my friend, he survived, but it's been a long road to recovery. The road he is still on. He hasn't worked a race since then, but he comes around now and then to visit. Guy with a mental breakdown in the cell near me, killing himself by smashing himself into the walls and the door there. The breakdown wasn't slow burning either. He began citing scripture and then he just kind of went off about his woman and what she was doing while he was in there. Talked about her killing someone he loved, and everything he did was telling everyone he gonna do something dangerous or stupid. He then proceeds to on the floor and completely cover himself in his cell. It was insane because not like anyone else locked up can help the person, and not like the CEO cared. They took forever, and by the time they came, he was a limp mess and the entire thing was horrible. I definitely hear he screams sometimes late at night, and if I'm having some vivid dreams, he almost always will just splash in randomly, either his voice or his crazy ass hair, etc. His cries were awful, and even when lucid, you could tell the guy was fighting back a tsunami of pain and anger. It's nuts to stand with a person who seems totally fine, and then shortly afterwards, you see them completely changed due to insanity or what have you. They beat that man all the time. It was really, being locked up definitely holds some of the darkest memories. I was a skydiving instructor for a couple of years. There was a really cocky kid that went through our program who was pretty bad at listening, barely tested into the solar jump phase, etc. I didn't have the authority to kick him out, and regardless, I wasn't close enough to the situation to know whether they were wrong in letting him jump the first jump. He had a poor free fall, not uncommon, but not terrible canopy work. I saw his second jump where he didn't follow radio directions under canopy and turned without looking at, such that his parachute wrapped around another student, obstructing that student's vision and mobility. At this the point with the first kid hanging by a collapsed canopy wrapped around the second kid till the 1,000 feet off the ground. They are trained to ride it down since neither is moving at a dangerous speed towards the ground. But of course Dingus doesn't want to follow direction or the advice given to him over the radio. He cuts away his first parachute, going back into freefall to allow his reserve to deploy. Watching from the tower that day, I thought I would witness this kid bounce off the ground. Fortunately, we had some of the best riggers in the country working for us, and the reserve deployed immediately. No sooner Had it fully deployed, the kid touched down. He couldn't have cut it any closer. Suffice it to say, this kid didn't get to jump again. I saw a head-on collision between two sums on a remote section of road near Jasper, approximately kilometers from the Closet Hospital. I was first on the scene, pulled bodies from burning vehicles after breaking windows. My shirt caught on fire, pulling people out. I attempted CPR with 2 other people on 4 of the 6 people until they passed away in our arms. Many of them were either missing body parts or CPR was not possible due to severe facial injuries. One man kept reaching up to me, asking me if he was going to die and telling me he couldn't breathe, but his lungs were obviously perforated. I breathed for him until he passed away. I told him he was loved and was with people who cared for him. Their vehicles caught on fire, causing a forest all around us, and had to be put out with a helicopter. Hours later, during the hour that it took for us to get to the scene, a bear walked through the scene and we had to constantly scare it away, probably due to the smell of blood. I watched 2 people burn to death because I could not reach them through the fire. I promise I tried to save them. I was covered in blood, body, fluids, bone chips, and a tooth stuck in my knee. There was a baby lying face down on the road, and it was placed on what I thought was the mom while doing CPR. In the end, the baby and mother were their only ones of all 8 who lived. So many people's lives were destroyed that day. I still had PTSD from the experience. I often feel like I failed at saving people, but their bodies were so severely damaged. Smells, sounds, textures were all so vivid that I get flashbacks. I'm emotional writing this. Since then I have had many horrifying dreams, but the dreams that stand out most are dreams of meeting their people who passed. In the dreams they tell me positive words of encouragement and appreciation, even laughs and jokes about life. It's weird. Please drive safe, love each other. I tried everything I could do to help. I promised God I tried. I and my friends were climbing up and jumping off of a partially collapsed dam. The side with deep water was probably 15-foot drop, and you had to climb up the slick concrete to jump off again. The left half of the dam was whole, and you could walk along. The top of the right half was collapsed and had about an inch of water over it. The collapsed part was rubble with rebar and all kinds of sharp metal sticking out. I was climbing on the corner, partially over water, partially over the collapsed part, when I slipped about 1 foot from the top. One of my friends on the top grabbed the back of my life jacket at the last second and held me for a few seconds. I was fully suspended over a 60-foot drop with bad. At the bottom I managed to get a hold of the dam wall again and climb back up. I owe that guy my life while in college. I took my girlfriend climbing in a wildlife management area afterwards. At her request, we camped there. I had climbed there often but never camped overnight. Thanks for listening. The subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more things you don't want to know. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories.